Welcome to Lesson 3 of Contemporary American Society, Causes and Consequences of Persecution in the United States. Last week, we discussed the causes of persecution, and today we're going to discuss the many ways in which the United States has experienced religious persecution, from the Revolutionary War to the attacks of September 11th, and their consequences. Throughout American history, members of different religious groups have faced religious persecution. Today, we're going to look at the problem of religious persecution in the United States and examples and patterns of religious intolerance, the unwillingness to accept views, beliefs, or behaviors that are different from one's own views, beliefs, or behavior. There are more than 1,500 religions in the United States. Christianity has long had the largest number of followers. As we discussed last week, the United States is a nation founded on religious conflict. The colonies were settled by the Pilgrims who were escaping religious persecution in Europe. There's even evidence that religion played an important role in the American Revolution, and that the revolutionaries, those who fought for freedom from England, that they believed that it was the will of God for the Americans to fight the battle against the British. While the Church of England was trying to establish one religion across the kingdom, colonial America, the colonists, were divided because each of the colonies was controlled by its own type of Christianity. Because of the distance from England, many religions were able to establish themselves to start in America, colony by colony. For example, the Anglicans, who believed the beliefs of the Church of England, were in Virginia. The Puritans settled in Massachusetts. Pennsylvania was full of Quakers. Baptists were in Rhode Island, and Roman Catholics were in Maryland, with the Protestants, who were the colonists' majority. Each of these colonies had its own religious character and favored one religious denomination, one branch of the Christian church. The American colonists saw the Revolution as a war for political independence and also a war to protect the religious diversity, the groups with different religious beliefs of the 13 colonies. So the Revolutionary War was a war for religious independence and freedom. By cutting its ties with England, the colonists could make sure that the different Christian denominations could live together in America. The conflict, the violent confrontation, was between the different denominations of Christianity on the one hand and the Church of England on the other hand. Meanwhile, the Church of England wanted the colonies to all hold the beliefs of the Anglican Church. Let's watch a short video about Christian persecution in the United States. During the period after the Revolutionary War, there was a lot of fighting between the different states and Christian denominations. The largest portion of Anglicans who were loyal to the Church of England lived in Virginia, where there was well-known religious persecution against Baptists and Presbyterians, who often involved violent physical attacks by the Anglicans. In 1771, a Virginia sheriff who was responsible for keeping the peace grabbed a Baptist minister from the stage at his parish and beat him to the ground outside, and then took him to a swamp and held his head in the mud until he almost drowned to death. After the Revolutionary War, there was a lot of religious conflict. Some states put an end to some churches while supporting other churches. Some states issued preaching licenses and collected tax money in order to establish government churches. Each state had its own policy on whether the government should be allowed to establish churches. Then, at the beginning of the 1800s, there were tensions between Catholics and Protestants, which led to violence against Irish Catholic immigrants. There was much immigration of Catholics from Europe, and at the same time, strong Protestant values spread across the country. So immigrants who were Catholic were viewed as outsiders, as if they didn't belong, and they were viewed as not democratic, as if they didn't believe in democracy. In the 1830s and 1840s, there was much violence against Catholics, particularly in the northeastern part of the country. In Massachusetts, a group set fire to a convent and a school. In Philadelphia, there were gun battles between those who had been here before the latest groups of immigrants arrived and mostly Irish Catholics. Martial law had to be declared, which refers to when the military rules to end the violence. Around the same time that anti-Catholic violence broke out in the Northeast, another religious group was being chased out of the same area. The Mormons were a religious group that was chased out of New York, out of Ohio, out of Missouri, and out of Illinois in the 1840s. They finally settled in Utah. They had built a thriving town in Illinois with a large Mormon temple. And the founder of the Mormons, Joseph Smith, announced that he was a candidate for president of the United States. The Mormons believed in polygamy, in a man having more than one wife at the same time. The people who lived there who weren't Mormon were frightened and jealous. So Joseph Smith and his brother were put in jail. A group of people who were against the Mormons burned the entire town and killed Joseph Smith and his brother. Shortly afterwards, Brigham Young led the Mormons to Utah, where they thrived, where they were successful. In 1857 in Utah, many people were afraid of a religious state of Mormons, and the President of the United States sent military troops there to install a government that wasn't Mormon. The Mormons killed 120 pioneers who were settlers going to California and who were hostile, who were against the Mormon religion, and who threatened to attack the Mormons. The killing of the pioneers increased negative feelings toward the Mormons, and tensions grew. During the Civil War, the persecution of the Mormons continued, and by 1887, it almost put an end to the Mormon Church. Finally, in the 1890s, the Mormons ended the practice of polygamy, of a man having more than one wife at the same time. And Utah became a US state. Jewish people have also suffered persecution in the United States, beginning in the 1890s, at the same time that the government started to limit immigration from Europe. Let's watch a video that discusses the causes and consequences of anti-Semitism, the hatred of Jews in the US from the 1890s to the present. While Jews have lived in America since colonial times, while Jews have lived in America since colonial times, they were mostly tolerated. They were allowed to live in peace, although there were examples of intolerance. By the 1920s, immigration quotas had taken effect. The US government had limited the number of immigrants to enter the country. The quotas were based on the national origin of each immigrant, on where they were from. The quotas stayed in effect even as Jewish refugees, people who were forced to leave their country in order to escape religious persecution in Europe, as the refugees fled to the United States. During the 1930s, anti-Semitism grew to levels that had not been seen before in the entire experience of Jews in America. In New York City and Boston, Jews were violently attacked. Threats, attacks, and propaganda, that is information that isn't true, that's used to publicize a political cause or other point of view, were mostly carried out by special groups like the Ku Klux Klan, which is a terrorist and hate group in the United States that believes that American whites are superior on a higher level and therefore should control all groups. Violence against individual Jews is viewed as a religious hate crime. A hate crime is a crime usually involving violence that's caused by prejudice, by disliking someone without good reason. For example, because of that person's race or religion. Hate crime statistics show that anti-Semitism is one of the most common causes of religious hate crimes in the US today. Let's talk about anti-Muslim persecution. Since the terrorist attacks of September 11th, 2001, known simply as 9/11, the persecution of Muslims in the US has become a key problem. During the year following the attacks, anti-Muslim hate crimes increased 1,600% from the previous year. Let's watch a short video about how the lives of Muslim Americans have changed since 9/11. Today, the problems of religious diversity and intolerance continue in the United States. The US Constitution, which requires religious freedom, has often come into conflict with the reality of religious intolerance in America. Native Americans, Jews, Catholics, and many others have suffered religious persecution in American history. The persecution of Muslims continues to be one of the issues that causes the most arguments and hostility in American life today. I'm posting a vocabulary list and homework for you. Next week, we're going to look at ethnic persecution. And remember that in order to keep your F1 visa as an international student, you need to attend every class and do all assignments. Have a good week.